What we see normally happening in business is you divide people based on, well, this guy is really creative, you think that this guy comes up with ideas and this other team executes them. That is inefficient and it actually doesn't work. What works is pairing people up and having the process, having them go through the motions, the ideation stage together, then the execution stage together, the implementation stage together. Only then it actually works. Hey, so in the last video, we were talking to you about how do you make choices and how to make better decisions because of your free will and how you can use that to affect the probabilities of what happens in your life. Now we're going to think about what happens when you encounter other people, at least what happens when you encounter one more person, right? Because this is where the area of collaboration starts to play a role. Now it's not just you and your choices, it's you and that person next to you, Or as a leader, if you're leading a team, it's thinking about how are my people connecting and collaborating or together, or as an owner of a whole organization or a business, you're thinking about, hey, are my people working well together, Because obviously there's always conflict. Well, there's always conflict. It depends on how skillful they are, There can be conflict, arguments, misunderstandings. Some people might just not gel. And is there any sort of glue that makes people gel? And this glue is called trust. Trust is at the basis of collaboration. When you have great trust, people collaborate. Like, for example, I've got a brother and I know I trust him. And so anything that I need with him, I know where he stands, I can work with him really, really well. And this is what makes, we can collaborate on whatever you want together. There's no issues there. Then it might be a matter of skill or a matter of agreement, but it's never an issue of trust or ability to actually work together. And that's kind of like the baseline that you want. When you have beautiful trust, it's not dependent on your CV. It's not depending on how people are, it's just, do people like each other enough to work together? It's super simple. How do you create that? And this is the topic of this video, because there's something called dynamic pairings that we're gonna talk to you about.
And this is especially important because probably you yourself have experienced this, where you start to work with one person and they're just the complete opposite to you. They constantly have a rebuttal for everything you say. They are almost like picking fights and driving you a little bit crazy. And actually, if you learn how to harness that, that will become your biggest source of inspiration and new ideas and creativity. And that's exactly what we want to show you how to do.
It's so interesting that the people that drive us most crazy sometimes is the people that have the best potential for us to work together and do some very exciting things. And you might have noticed another sort of, it could be someone that really that you're arguing a lot with, or you might have noticed in your life that you partner with certain people, and certain people you just click really well, and you are you sort of you get on a roll with them, and it's a very, very good relationship. It's a very productive relationship. And we wanted to share with you that we've sort of researched and discovered what's the secret to this and how to make this happen. So that I don't know, sometimes I feel like saying imagine you're a leader and you're leading 100 people, right? Maybe 1,000 people. Well, instead of thinking it like a full number, like 1,000 or 100, think of it in terms of pairs. You start to think of it in terms of pairs. You've got 50 pairs or you've got 100 pairs. And how do I make that work? Because those 500 pairs are actually going to equal the manpower of, I think it's sometimes double, or at least it's 1.5 times, right? Of what you had before. And it's real increases in productivity that happen that we've noticed.
We spent a lot of time with this, studying psychology, studying psychometric assessments, studying all sorts of different literature around this topic to see if we could distill it down. And what was happening is, we realized it's just not even about any of those things as much as it is about the two roles that are being played. A good example of this is in dancing.
Both me and Anastasia, we actually met dancing. And in dancing, there's something called roles, which you can flip. Sometimes
there's a leader and a follower.
And a follower, right?
It's gender neutral now. Traditionally it used to be that leaders were the men and followers were the women, but now everybody swaps, so it doesn't matter. It's more about what role do you want to play.
And if you think about it from the perspective of trust, there's two people coming together, performing a very creative act, but at the same time completely trusting each other. I mean, sometimes I'm dancing with somebody, I don't even know their name, I have never met them, and we're doing, like, in Spanish it's called piruetas, like we're like boom, like, flipping over each other's head, like it's okay, and there's real trust there. But why is that?
Yeah, and you have to trust like that. If for those who aren't in the dance community, like there's a lot of vulnerability that comes with, let's say, as a follower, allowing your body to be manipulated by a complete stranger. You have to trust that they know what they're doing, that it's not going to lead to injuries, and of course, there's things you do within yourself. But it's just to illustrate the point that you come together and you build trust really fast.
That's because there's a practical role that you can learn to master. It's a practical role. It's not a theory. It's knowledge about how the body works when the body is leading, like when you're using your body to lead another person, and how the body works when the body is following. That is universal across all people. And there is the same thing when you're working. It's very interesting because we started to research this. We got super excited because there's the exact same thing happening when you're working with someone. When you are working with someone, you're either communicating, you're either the one that's like talking, right? Or the one that's generating the ideas, generating the information, or the one that's receiving the information and kind of like processing. And then those roles start to flip. It's the same thing. So instead of mastering different personalities, you have to learn a deeper level, which is what are the basic roles that are being played in any kind of collaboration? Because there's always like the giving, the receiving, the active principle, the receptive principle.
So then, with all of this knowledge that we were getting, we started to, our go to is always fundamentals. And a lot of times that means looking at nature. How does nature do it, right? Because it precedes us, let's just say. And so we started observing, and in nature, it is always two roles that are, let's say, seemingly opposite at first, but actually they are complementary. They come together to create something new. Even flowers, right? There's like a part that gives like more seeds, and then the part that receives them, and then they blossom. I think I'm not saying that very well, but it happens all of the time.
You know what was really cool? I was reading a book on ancient Egypt, and in this book, it was stated, like, or even the ancient Egyptians knew that there's always an active principle, there's always a receptive principle. This is a law of nature, and it's when the thing that struck me is that it was whenever nature wants to be creative, but you want to be creative. For example, getting your team, if you've got an operations team, to run really efficiency, that is a creative act. Normally you don't think of it as, because you think of creativity as artists, but creativity is actually being able to orchestrate, for example, a new product going through, being able to make sure that the client gets delivered on time. That's a creative act. You went from client didn't get the product yet to client got the product. Or maybe you're in a sales role. Every new sale is a creative process where you are where there was no sale before, now there's a sale. You're like a magician, Think of what does nature do? Every time nature wants to create something, two people join. And it's not just, it's not obviously male and female, because when you were young, or when you, on even now, well, I guess, you always have buddies, your best friend. Look at your best friend. Why does everyone have a best friend that they gravitate with at all times? Why not 3 or 4 or 5? You have many friends, but there's one that's like, oh, this one's my best friend. Because what we discovered in our research is human beings, we are made to gravitate towards pairings. It is very natural for us to pair up. And it is very natural in nature, every time nature wants to do a creative process, it pairs up. So these.
And more importantly, it doesn't just pair up two of the same thing, it always pairs up two complementary things. And so this is where we started to discover kind of like the idea of roles, because you need two kind of like different different elements that work well together in order to create something greater than the sum of their each individual parts. And it's really important here to call out the fact that it's not so much about like a lot of people when they start to dabble in this, they're like thinking, oh, one person gives the idea and the other person does the thing, right? And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about on the level of idea, before you get to the implementation or the execution. On the level of idea, there needs to be two participants, two roles, not one, two, because that rounds out the idea and makes it almost like viable for the real world.
So one person is doing the abstraction of it, like kind of like the intuitive part of it, and the other person is adding the detail to the idea and making sure that it kind of like squares logically. That's in the ideation process. And then those same two people now go into the execution part. And in the execution, the person that was a little bit, that person is dealing with unforeseen circumstances and little changes and adaptations, while the other person is doing some of more of the implementation part of it, doing the timing of things, So both people as a dynamic pair are going through the ideation phase, through the execution phase, the implementation phase, through anything. So it is, you get a higher performance by pairing people up, so that one job gets done by that pair as opposed to two jobs getting done by two individuals. It is a higher, they'll do it faster if those two people do
Eventually, yeah.
one job and the other. Eventually, but it's actually very natural. It's actually very natural. And this is the interesting part about the creative process, that nature already sort of like gravitates us to do this. If you leave people alone and you just let them work, they're gonna pair up. They're gonna have like a best friend, that somebody that they really like to work with. They're gonna have little couples are gonna be forming, and this is the natural thing for human beings, to have a buddy, to have someone that is complementary to you. Think of it in your own life. Think of like your best friend. Well, they weren't the same like you. You chose a best friend that was a little bit different. That would really
Enrich your life.
enrich your life. Yeah, and it's in this richness. Richness, see, is higher productivity.
And what I want to call out here is what Jesus was saying before about how the two people, the two roles are present in the idea phase as well as the execution phase. But what can happen, and what we've seen sometimes happen, is maybe they stay the same or maybe they even swap. That's the beauty of roles, is that it's not so much dependent on, hey, I am this type of person and I will always and forever be this type of person. No, it can vary depending on your interests, your talents, your whatever parts of yourself that you've developed. An analogy that we like to give in this area is like you have two hands, right? And so, but you probably are stronger in writing with one. So for me, for example, I'm right-handed. I didn't develop my left hand. Could I write with it? Yes. Does it look like a toddler's handwriting? Yes, because it hasn't been refined and practiced through the years. And so what we find with this roles is that people do gravitate towards one or the other because of their own talents or the way they were raised, etc. But that doesn't mean you have to be locked into it. It's not like a box that we're putting you into.
No, everybody can do both roles, but you are more proficient in one. And if you're a leader, you've got people that are more proficient in one and the other, and your job is to just observe them and try and pair them up. This is going to be the massive increases in creativity and productivity.
And what we want to call out most importantly is that it's not so much about what framework you use, because there's many different things. Like there's what's that one that I always can't pronounce?
Belbin team roles.
The Belvin team roles, for example, or the MBTI assessment, or Myers, whatever it is. There's a lot of these assessments, and we're not going to be telling you that, oh, ours is the best, because what we found in research is that it actually doesn't even matter so much about the different types of roles. What they found is even if you make a team, let's say using whatever assessment of the most best people put together, that doesn't necessarily increase performance as much as just having the awareness and the consciousness around the fact that there are roles to be played. That's what makes the biggest difference. And so, if you're going to take anything away from this video, is that number one, you should have an awareness that there are roles to be played.
And actually, that there are two main ones. This is kind of like the secret sauce, because you can get very advanced with this, But at a level of, if you want to scale across 1,000 people, 2,000 people, as long as everybody understands there are just two main ones. There are two main ones. The most basic thing for human beings is to pair up with your body. That that is super important. That's going to give you like a huge, that's going to get you 80% of the way there. And now you can start to like leverage those increases in productivity. Things are going to start, it's not just that things are going to start being done faster, it's that things are going to start being done at a higher quality. That's, you know, or actually getting done, or actually like being implemented, or change will actually happen. A lot of the time we measure velocity, but we don't measure, like, we have to measure velocity and quality and success rate. Like, all of those are all measures of productivity. And by having complementary people work together, it's kind of like they cover all bases. One person's more worried about getting it done fast, the other person's more worried about getting it that right, and eventually it just gets done, and you can rest, you know. So
So we're saying the first thing you want to take away is awareness, and you want to take it a step further. The second thing you can do is intentional design. What we mean by this is actually figuring out, well, who is better at this role as opposed to who's better at the complementary role. Because if you are more intentional with it, and if you're leveraging people's strengths and talents, then you take that just, a few levels further as well.
think of it like, imagine you're playing a football game, and people, the difference between people being like, you know what, I'm going to play defense. You know what, I'm going to play attack. Well, defense and attack, they're two roles, you know, you're either one or the other. And so I know there's midfield, but let's just make it more simple, right? And so as long as people are aware and intentional that they're playing it, even if someone is, it's worth more, even if someone is really, really, really good at defense, it's better that they choose a role consciously, even if it's the one that they're not good at. If they say, hey, I'm going to go attack, at least you've got a little bit of order. You know, he's playing attack, even he's better good at defense, but he's playing attack, you play defense, so that people are actually orchestrated. Because the moment you start into doing plus one, working with more people, the higher risk is that they separate, that they don't get on well, that there's an argument that really stops the ball rolling. But if you have people that are consciously going into a specific role,
In a coordinated effort.
even if that's not their best role, but just because they're doing it, now there's a trust being built, because they're not going to be stepping into each other's lane, right? They're not going to be bumping heads, and they're actually going to, now that frees up space to go and grab the objective. Super important.
That's right. So make sure that you figure out how to use, how to coordinate the people. And what we really recommend here also is that you choose something that is very simple, right? Like Myers-Briggs or MBTI, 16 different personalities, and I think it can get split into even more, right?
And that's not even roles. That's just personalities, which is just a little bit. It's a little bit more complex, you know. Roles is more like any personality could do these two roles.
Well, the Bilbo.
The Belbin roles is a closer assessment, but even that has many roles. No, you want to simplify it.
And the reason you want to simplify it is because when the pressure gets cranked up, the complex things, they just get thrown out the window, right? And what you want is something that stands the test of pressure and stands the test of time, because also, people are very enthusiastic in the beginning when you introduce these frameworks and you do a workshop and everyone's like, wow, this is amazing, and then 3 weeks later they all forget about it because the day-to-day stuff kicks in. So you need something very simple that can be continuously used even in the face of high pressure. And that brings us to the third point, which is you want to continue to cultivate these roles, right? You don't want to let things just fall by the wayside, but you want to figure out continuously new ways to use these roles across the projects that you're doing in your organization.
Actually, what you'll see is that it's so natural for people to pair up that if you get the pairs right, that people are going to love it. People are going to start being like, well, I actually really like working with this person. I don't separate me. Like, I love it. Like, let's just keep the momentum going. It'll be very natural. It's just so easy, so natural for people to work with someone that complements them. There's a collaboration between Srivana
You're going to butcher this.
Ramanujan.
Ramanujan, maybe? Ramanujan?
Srinivasa Ramanujan. I'm really sorry for the spelling, for the pronunciation, but basically there's an Indian mathematician and a British one. His name is G.H. Hardy, and he
The Indian mathematician, he was self-taught. He was kind of like a prodigy. He just had all these cool ideas, and a lot of them came from his gut. It wasn't like he sat there, which in traditional mathematics you would write out proofs and formulas in order to show your reasoning and logic to arrive to a conclusion. And this guy was doing the opposite. He was like, he would just have an inspiration, a gut feeling, and he would throw it out there. And G.H. Hardy, he saw the brilliance of it. He was like, there's something here. But without the proof behind it, the greater, broader mathematical community wouldn't take it seriously. And so they ended up partnering together.
Yeah, like he provided frameworks and verification and validity to his ideas. He helped them to kind of like ground them, and it's super interesting. Like think of it if that wouldn't have happened. So they say it's one of the most productive intellectual pairings in the history of humankind. I mean, like the stuff that they did together is huge, And but imagine that it wouldn't have happened. Now you have somebody that might be a prodigy, that really is a genius, out there in the world, maybe sitting down in his chair, creating amazing things that nobody would have ever heard about.
No one takes seriously.
And on the other hand, you have a very, distinguished mathematician doing great, like rigorous stuff, but nothing really too revolutionary. And so he just, well,
Fades into the background.
fades into the background. What did he accomplish? Well, not much, because he just, and this is the idea. You put those two elements together, now you've got the genius with the grounding. Boom. Now there is a process of creation.
And in addition to that, you want to cultivate the right atmosphere to do this kind of work. So, psychological safety is super important because you want people to be able to fail without fear of retribution or punishment, right? If you, especially, well, as Jesus was saying before, for example, if you put someone in a role that is less developed, they're going to make mistakes, okay? It's a part of the process. But if there's a level of psychological safety in your team, then that mistake gets learned from and moved on from quite quickly, as opposed to if somebody's afraid, they're just not going to even be able to have the freedom to make the mistake, and therefore they're going to be shut down and is going to be counterproductive.
I'm going to share with you something that happens in our advanced programs. When we're teaching people these to work in dynamic pairs, we give them veto over the other person's ideas. So we say, like, in order for you to work together well, if you don't like the other person's action or idea, the decision they're going to make, you can veto it. It requires two people to be in agreement in order to make a decision. And at the beginning, people really argue when they don't understand what's happening. What's actually happening is that the part of people that are used to working by themselves is sort of like rebelling, and they're like, because they can only get so far. They haven't yet realized the gains of working in a partnership, in a proper partnership. And so what's going to happen is they will take an idea, they'll argue, and the other person will veto it, and there'll be a little bit of friction. That's why the psychological, you have to tell them, like, yeah, it's okay, like, you guys can argue, you can fail, like, it's no problem. Because once they relax, let time pass, and be like, okay, well, what's an idea that we can actually come up together? What's happened to every single team that we've done this with, every single partnership or couple or pair that we've done this with, is at that moment, there's like a moment of creativity. We can't explain it, but a new idea, a new decision appears. And this is a decision that both people are actually in agreement with. And because they went through the argument phase, now they found something new. And this new thing, this new beautiful idea, they're both in agreement with. And what they'll normally tell us at the end is, oh my God, if I would have been just me by myself, I would have done the previous thing. But this is so much better, so much better.
Every time.
The previous thing would have even failed, or I missed something and I wasn't able to see it. But it's thanks to me working with you that now we're in this like amazing position. I mean, this happens to me and Anastasia all the time, but we've also seen it happen across big teams that we do this with. It's super important.
Yeah. So, like we said, three things. If you take away anything from this video, make sure you become aware that there's roles, you intentionally design and coordinate those roles, and then that you cultivate this through time and create a safe atmosphere to do this. So, we hope you found this valuable, and
I'll talk to you
see
soon.
you next one.